A few months ago, on a busy street corner in a Tokyo suburb, a man looked lost. He was a foreigner, seemingly a traveler, and when he stopped a local employee to ask for directions, the interaction was perfectly mundane. You know the scene, the slight bow, the helpful pointing, the polite exchange of thank yous. To show his gratitude, the traveler, who introduced himself as a Ukrainian, insisted on buying the local man a drink. It felt like one of those warm, only in Japan moments of hospitality. Over the next 2 years, that thank you drink evolved into a series of expensive meals and envelopes stuffed with 10,000 yen banknotes. By the time the dust settled this January, that helpful Japanese local had handed over classified details on cutting-edge machine tool technology in exchange for about 700,000 yen in cash. And that grateful Ukrainian traveler, he wasn't Ukrainian at all. He was allegedly an undercover agent for Moscow's Foreign Intelligence Service, operating out of the Russian trade mission. What's truly striking about this case isn't just the classic long con or the exchange of industrial secrets. It's the weaponization of a cultural virtue. Intelligence experts are now pointing to an uncomfortable reality. Russian spies find Japan to be one of the easiest targets in the world, specifically because the people are so polite. A simple gesture of helping a stranger find a train station has become the ultimate, well-worn spycraft tactic. But as Tokyo reels from the scandal, a deeper layer of suspicion is emerging. The Russian agent was allowed to leave the country months ago without being named, and the timing of the reveal is almost too perfect. As the government pushes for aggressive new anti-espionage laws, critics are asking, is Japan truly a spy paradise because of its manners, or is this specific scandal being polished and presented now to justify a massive shift in Japanese law? It turns out, in the world of high-stakes espionage, even the most sincere thank you can be a calculated opening move. I have to be honest with you, right off the bat, when I read through the briefing on this case, my first reaction wasn't just shock at the espionage, it was skepticism.
Skepticism. So,
the narrative is almost too clean, isn't it? It feels a little polished. You have the innocent, helpful Japanese citizen, the deceptive foreigner, and this idea of weaponizing politeness. It reads like a fable designed to prove a point.
it does have a certain cinematic quality to it, I agree. But I think if we just dismiss it as a fable, we miss the gravity of what's actually happening in the background.
Okay.
Because while the polite victim angle is definitely how it's being framed in the media, the mechanics underneath, I mean, the specific legal and economic vulnerabilities that allowed this to happen, they are incredibly real.
So it's not really a story about manners.
Well, it is and it isn't. It's really a story about a systemic failure of state security, where manners just happen to be the point of entry, the unlocked window.
Right. And that's what we need to get into today, because this term spy paradise, it gets thrown around the press a lot when people talk about Japan. It gives you this image of foreign agents just walking in, grabbing hard drives, and walking out while everyone bows to them. Is that actually the reality, or is that just, hyperbolic?
It's not hyperbole. But maybe the word paradise is a little misleading. It suggests they're doing it for fun, like a vacation. They're doing it because the risk-reward ratio is just, it's completely broken in their favor.
How?
Japan is an economic superpower, but it has the security clearance protocols of a public library. The barriers to entry for an intelligence officer are remarkably low compared to, say, the United States or even the UK. But to understand why it's a paradise, we can't just look at this one guy in the Tokyo suburb. We have to look at the entire architecture of the country itself.
And that architecture, that brings us to the first major pillar of this situation, the law. Or, more accurately, the absence of law, the ghost of the law. I want to share a specific perspective I found that I think really nails this tension. I saw a discussion online regarding the spy paradise reputation Japan holds, especially when you contrast it with the rigid, almost suffocating National Security Act in South Korea. There is this specific narrative of a Japanese civil servant who realized that under the current laws, leaking sensitive industrial data isn't treated as a strike against the soul of the nation, but as a mere breach of trust or a minor administrative lapse.
An HR issue, basically.
Exactly. And you have to try to imagine the frustration of an investigator who tracks a Russian operative for months, only to realize the legal framework is a ghost of the post-war constitution. A document so terrified of returning to the shadows of the Tokko that it left the back door wide open. Is a strange, paralyzing paradox where the ghost of 1945 prevents the protection of 2025. As someone who analyzes these shifts, I find it fascinating yet alarming. We see a nation caught between its pacifist identity and the cold reality of modern geopolitical theft. It's a struggle to redefine security without resurrecting the surveillance state that once destroyed it. The ghost of 1945 prevents the protection of 2025. Attention. Every country has baggage. Every country has its historical ghosts. Why is Japan's baggage so uniquely paralyzing when it comes to prosecuting a spy?
It really comes down to the definition of the crime itself. I mean, what is espionage, legally speaking? In most nations, it's a specific high-level crime against the state. Treason, sedition, those kinds of words. In Japan, for a very, very long time, that legal concept just wasn't there in the same way. You have to understand the trauma of the toko, the special hire police, from the pre-war and wartime era.
These were the thought police.
They were exactly the thought police. They arrested people for ideological deviation, for having the wrong books, for harboring what they call dangerous thoughts. The fear of that kind of unchecked state power is profound. It's baked into the national psyche.
So the post-war Constitution was written explicitly to make sure that kind of state power could never, ever exist again.
The allergy to state surveillance, to any kind of law that could be used to suppress dissent, was written directly into the DNA of the modern Japanese legal system. So whenever the government tries to legislate anti-espionage measures, the public, the media, the legal scholars, they immediately see the shadow of the toko.
They see the ghost.
They see the ghost. And this resulted in a legal framework where, until very recently, prosecutors had to rely on something called the Unfair Competition Prevention Law.
The Unfair Competition Prevention Law? That sounds like something you'd use for a trademark dispute, not for high treason.
Let's think about the mechanics of that. To prosecute someone under that law, historically, you didn't just have to prove that they stole information. You had to prove that the theft resulted in a tangible profit for a third party, or that it financially damaged the original company.
So it framed the theft of national security secrets as a civil commercial dispute.
Exactly. It's a business problem, not a national security crisis.
Incredible. So if I'm a spy and I steal the blueprints for, I don't know, a missile component, but I don't sell them, I just give them to my handler because I'm a true believer in the cause. Technically, under the old version of that law, I haven't really violated the unfair competition aspect in the same way.
It becomes incredibly difficult to prosecute. You're trying to catch a spy with a net designed for catching corporate embezzlers. The burden of proof is all wrong. The police end up acting like tax auditors. They're desperately trying to find a financial paper trail because they can't simply charge the person with betraying the state because that legal concept is so weak, so diluted.
And what about now? I mean, they did update the law, right? I saw numbers like 1 billion yen for corporations. Again?
They did. The corporate fines are heavy now, and that's a deterrent for sure. But for the individual, for the engineer meeting the Russian agent in the bar, the penalties are often suspended sentences or fines that are frankly negligible compared to the potential payout from the foreign government.
So the 700,000 yen bribe we talked about in the intro, that's about $4,500. What kind of fine would that person face?
It could be in that ballpark, or even less with a suspended sentence. For the intelligence agency paying the bribe, a potential fine becomes just a business expense. It's part of the cost of the operation. The risk for their asset is manageable.
It's just not a serious deterrent.
And this really gets highlighted when you look at the contrast with South Korea, which you mentioned in that narrative.
Yeah.
Because geographically, they're right next door. They have a similar history of post-war rebuilding. But their approach to this is just tree. It's from another planet.
Diametrically opposite, you're saying.
It is the difference between a nation that believes the war is over and a nation that knows it is merely in a ceasefire. South Korea operates under the National Security Act, the NSA, and specifically the infamous Article 7.
This is the really controversial one, right?
Article 7 criminalizes the praise, incitement, or propagation of North Korean ideology. This is a sweeping, incredibly broad power.
So what does that mean in practice? Like if you're in Seoul and you retweet a post from a North Korean state media account, you could be in trouble.
You can be arrested.
Yeah.
If you possess literature that is deemed to benefit the enemy, you can be arrested and prosecuted. We're talking about an average of over 60 prosecutions a year under this law for the last 2 decades.
Wow. That sounds incredibly authoritarian for a democracy as vibrant as South Korea. We see massive protests in Seoul all the time. It's not a quiet, compliant society.
You would assume, as an outsider, that the South Korean public would be clamoring to abolish this law. It seems like a relic of the military dictatorships.
Yeah, that's what I would think.
But when you actually look at the polling and the political landscape, abolition is an unpopular idea. It's a minority position. Even the Progressive Minju Party, whose members were historically targeted by these very laws during the dictatorship era, they generally argue for limiting the scope rather than scrapping it entirely. And they're conservatives. They want to keep it or even strengthen it.
Why?
Because the artillery is pointed at them. Seoul is only 30 miles from the DMZ. The threat from North Korea isn't an abstract concept discussed in policy papers. It's a visceral, daily reality. So the South Korean public, for the most part, has made a calculated trade-off. We will tolerate a certain level of state intrusion and a very aggressive counterintelligence apparatus because the alternative is existential annihilation.
Whereas in Japan, for decades, that peace has felt much more permanent, more real.
Exactly. After 1945, Japan's bureaucracy prioritized two things: economic reconstruction and pacifist identity. They didn't build the fortress legal structures because, one, they didn't think they needed them, and two, they were terrified of what those structures would do to their own hard-won liberty.
But the world has changed.
The world has fundamentally changed. Japan is now facing an expansionist China and a resurgent, aggressive Russia. The geopolitical neighborhood is a lot rougher, and that ghost of 1945 is now preventing them from dealing with the reality of 2026.
So you have this legal void, a house with effectively no locks on the doors because the owners are afraid of locking themselves in. What exactly is in the house that's worth stealing? We keep hearing about machine tools. Why is this specific technology the big prize? I recently came across an account of a small, specialized firm in one of those Japanese industrial clusters, you know, the kind of place that produces the mother machines, which allow the rest of the world to build advanced technology. The story focused on a technical director who found his designs for a multi-axis CNC machine appearing in a foreign military supply chain just 18 months after a friendship with a diplomatic attaché began.
18 months, that's a quick turnaround.
Right, and the point was, this isn't just about losing a trade secret, it's about the erosion of a nation's edge. When these dual-use technologies, these precision tools that can carve both car engines and missile components, are bled out through these low-level bribes, the strategic moat surrounding Japan it disappears. I can almost feel the weight of realization on that director's shoulders as he saw his life's work copied and scaled by competitors in China or Russia.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, this is the most visceral part of the narrative, the silent hollowing out of an industrial giant. It's a reminder that in the modern age, a country's sovereignty is held together not just by its borders, but by the integrity of its blueprints and the silent machines humming away in its factories. Mother machine. But let's get granular here. We aren't just talking about a drill press you could buy at a local hardware store.
No, we are talking about the absolute pinnacle of mechanical engineering. A mother machine is, as the name implies, a machine used to make other machines. Specifically in this context, we are looking at things like 5-axis CNC, that's computer numerical control machines.
Yes. What does a 5-axis machine do?
So a simple drill press moves in one axis, up and down. A more complex machine might move in 3 axes, X, Y, and Z. A 5-axis machine can move a part or a cutting tool along those 3 linear axes and rotate it on 2 additional axes simultaneously.
Which means you can create incredibly complex shapes.
Incredibly complex, with tolerances measured in single microns.
A single micron. To put that in context for you listening, a human red blood cell is about 7 microns wide. So we were talking about shaving metal to a fraction of the width of a blood cell.
Precisely. And this is where the dual-use problem becomes so critical. If you have a machine that can grind a drive shaft for a Lexus to that level of absolute perfection, that same machine, literally the same piece of hardware, maybe with different software, could be used to grind the centrifuge rotors needed for enriching uranium, or the intricate curved turbine blades for a jet fighter engine, or the fins on a hypersonic missile. The technology is agnostic. It just carves metal with unbelievable precision.
So when Russia or China gets their hands on these designs, or the machines themselves, they aren't trying to build better sedans.
No. Russia specifically is looking for military applications. They're under heavy sanctions. Their domestic industrial base has atrophied in some areas. They need these machines to bypass those sanctions and maintain their aerospace and ballistic capabilities. And Japan absolutely dominates this market.
Which companies are we talking about?
Companies like Fanuc, Okuma, or DMG Mori, though the latter is technically German-Japanese now, they hold the keys to this kingdom. And it's not just the physical hardware, it's the thermal stability algorithms, the control software, the decades of accumulated craft and knowledge.
And this all connects to Japan's broader national economic strategy, doesn't it? I've heard the term strategic indispensability used.
That is the doctrine. It's a very clever, if vulnerable, strategy.
Yeah.
Japan knows it can no longer compete with China on volume manufacturing. It can't compete on cheap labor. So the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, or MADE-I, has pushed a strategy of occupying the choke points of the global supply chain.
What's a choke point in this context?
It's a component, a material, or a piece of technology that is so specialized and difficult to produce that only Japan can make it at the necessary quality and scale. The goal is to be the only supplier of something so critical that the global economy literally cannot function without them.
Like the situation with South Korea and hydrogen fluoride a few years back.
Example, Japan controlled over 90% of the global supply of high-purity hydrogen fluoride, which is absolutely essential for etching semiconductors. When Tokyo tightened export controls during a diplomatic dispute, it sent shockwaves through the entire Korean tech sector. Samsung and SK Hynix were scrambling.
Bridge.
That is real geopolitical power. It's the ability to turn off a tap that another country's economy depends on. That's what strategic indispensability means.
But if a spy steals the blueprint for the hydrogen fluoride purification process or for the 5-axis machine,
Then the leverage evaporates. The moat is drained. If China can copy that 5-axis controller, or if Russia can replicate the spindle design, Japan isn't indispensable anymore. They become just another high-cost manufacturer in a sea of competitors. Their geopolitical power diminishes overnight.
And this is why the different approaches of China and Russia matter so much.
This is why the vacuum cleaner approach by China is so uniquely dangerous to Japan's long-term strategy.
Okay, distinguish that for me again. You mentioned Russia is surgical. How is China's approach different in practice?
The Russian SVR, their Foreign Intelligence Service, operates like a sniper. They have a shopping list. They know there are specific gaps in their military-industrial complex, often exacerbated by sanctions. They target the mother machines because they need to build weapons now. It's very focused.
Okay.
China, on the other hand, operates with a much, much broader scope. Intelligence agencies refer to it as a vacuum cleaner approach because they try to suck up everything. Everything and anything. Agricultural data from American seed companies, university research on materials science, genetic databases from hospitals, and yes, of course, machine tool blueprints.
Sure.
The U.S. Department of Justice estimates that something like 50 to 80% of all economic espionage cases have a link back to China.
So their goal isn't just to fill a current gap.
Their goal is to leapfrog. It's a national strategy. Why spend 10 years and billions of dollars in R&D developing your own precision spindle technology when you can hack a server in Nagoya or bribe an engineer in Osaka and get the same result in 18 months for a fraction of the cost? You skip the most expensive, most difficult part of innovation.
And their intelligence services are directly involved in this.
It's institutional. The PLA, the People's Liberation Army, has units like the famous Unit 61398, whose entire job is hacking foreign corporations for economic and technological secrets that then get passed to state-owned enterprises. It's a completely different model from the West.
And Japan has tried to respond to this, right? I read about the Economic Security Promotion Act from 2022.
They are trying. That act is the beginning of building a defense. The government is trying to establish a supply chain early warning system and identify critical products, semiconductors, batteries, biotech, these machine tools that need extra protection.
But it's a struggle.
It's a massive struggle because it goes against the post-war corporate culture. For decades, Japanese companies have been notoriously reticent to report hacking incidents or data breaches because it harms their stock price and lease. It's an admission of failure, of vulnerability. So they'd rather handle it quietly, internally, which means the government never gets a clear picture of how bad the problem really is.
It's ironic, isn't it? For so long, Japan has been a champion of free trade, of open markets. And now, to survive, they have to start building walls, creating things like secret patents and demanding security clearances for private sector engineers.
It's a huge ideological shift, but it's a necessary one. The problem is you can build all the legal and digital walls you want, but at the end of the day, espionage always comes down to people.
Right. And that bribe in Osaka brings us to the human element. Because we can talk about laws and microns all day, but eventually someone has to make a choice. Someone has to physically hand over the data. And this is where the story gets really, I think, quite depressing. It's not about evil masterminds. It's about regular people being put in impossible situations. I heard a story about a veteran engineer at a high-end machine tool plant in central Japan, a man who'd spent 30 years perfecting the calibration of precision spindles. In the 1980s, his loyalty to the company's family was absolute, fueled by the promise of lifetime security and a rising national sun.
The classic Japanese model.
Exactly. But I saw a report detailing how this modern era of stagnant wages and the slow decay of that social contract has left men like him completely vulnerable. He didn't meet his handler in a dark alley. He met him at a quiet izakaya, sharing drinks with a foreign consultant who just praised his overlooked expertise. And I try to imagine the moment he accepted an envelope of cash, not to betray his country, not in his own mind, but simply to pay for his daughter's university tuition as his bonus shrank yet again. It's a quiet tragedy. The collapse of the Confucian corporate bond isn't just an economic shift, it's a psychological breach that turns a lifetime of craftsmanship into a commodity for sale. Reading this, I feel a real sense of melancholy. While we often view espionage through the lens of high-stakes thrillers, it is so frequently rooted in the quiet desperation of a man who feels his lifelong loyalty was never truly reciprocated by the system he served. That image of the izakaya, the casual bar, it really sticks with me. It's so mundane. But you're arguing that this vulnerability is structural, that the Japanese employment system itself is, in a way, creating these spies.
It's the collapse of the system known as Shushin Koyo lifetime employment. For the post-war generation, for the man who built Japan Inc., the deal was simple, and it was absolute. You give the company your entire life, your unwavering loyalty, and in return, the company takes care of you. You are family. It's a cradle-to-grave social contract.
But the lost decades completely broke that deal.
Shattered it. Since the asset bubble burst in the early 1990s, wages in Japan have been largely stagnant. If you adjust for inflation, real wages have barely moved in 30 years. Meanwhile, the cost of living, and especially the cost of things like university tuition for your children, has continued to go up.
So you have this whole generation of workers who are stuck.
You have these men, mostly men in their 50s and 60s, who are sitting on this absolute treasure trove of technical knowledge and experience. They are the institutional memory of these companies. But their bonuses are being cut. Their promotion tracks have stalled. They see younger, cheaper contract workers coming in. They feel the company has betrayed them first.
So when the Ukrainian traveler or the foreign consultant sits down next to them at the bar and buys them a drink, what are they actually buying? It's not just the data, is it?
No, not at first. They are buying validation. This is the psychological key to the whole operation. The spy doesn't start by asking for secrets. That would set off alarm bells. They start by asking for advice. You are such an expert. I've heard so much about your work. Your company is so lucky to have you. I'd just love to hear your opinion on this industry trend.
That feeds the ego of someone who feels underappreciated.
It fills the exact void left by the company. It makes them feel valued again, like their 30 years of experience actually matter to someone. And then, once that rapport is built, comes the concept of giri.
Giri. That's obligation, right?
It's a deep-seated sense of social obligation or reciprocity. We talked about politeness earlier, but this is the functional side of it. In Japan, if someone treats you to a series of very expensive meals, the pressure to reciprocate is immense. It's not just being nice, it's a social debt that has to be repaid.
And if you can't afford to pay for the next expensive meal,
you pay with information. And it starts small. Could you maybe get me a copy of that public-facing industry report? It's hard to find online. Innocuous. Then it escalates. I'm trying to understand this one technical problem. You're the expert. Could you maybe explain how your company solved it?
Just a little bit of info, nothing classified, of course, just industry trends.
Exactly. And this plays into what researchers call the toolkit rationalization. We see this in the data. There was a survey by the Ponemon Institute that's really eye-opening. They found that something like 60% of employees who resign from a company admit to taking company data with them when they leave.
60%.
Massive. Yeah. But the key is that they don't view it as theft. They don't see themselves as criminals. Their rationalization is, this is my work. I designed this spindle. I wrote this code. This is my knowledge. Why shouldn't I keep a copy for my own future use?
So the spy isn't trying to convince them to become a traitor to their country. The spy is just convincing them that they are sharing their own intellectual property with a friend who appreciates them.
And once that first envelope of cash is accepted, even a small amount, like 100,000 yen, just as a thank you gesture, the trap snaps shut. Now you're compromised. Now the requests get more specific. The polite friend slowly becomes the handler. And what are you going to do? Go to the police and admit you've been taking money from a foreigner in exchange for company information.
And the culture of politeness and non-confrontation inside the company helps hide all of this.
It's the perfect camouflage. The Japanese cultural aversion to conflict is so high, and the respect for seniority is so ingrained, that nobody wants to be the one to confront the veteran engineer and ask, hey, why are you downloading proprietary files to a USB drive at 7 p.m. on a Friday? You just assume he has a good reason. The politeness shields the predator.
You have weak laws, incredibly valuable secrets, and a disgruntled, underpaid, and overly polite workforce. But that brings us back to the beginning. We have to ask the cynical question here at the end. The timing of this specific case.
Yes.
This story broke in January of 2026. The Russian spy, the alleged spy, he left the country months ago. So why are we hearing about this in such a polished, dramatic way now?
Because fear is a political accelerant, and this story is incredibly useful for certain political factions in Japan right now, specifically people like Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi and the more hawkish wing of the LDP, the ruling party.
What's their agenda?
They have been pushing for years for a major overhaul of the national security apparatus. They want to pass the kind of economic security legislation that gives the government real teeth. We're talking about a formal security clearance system for the private sector, much higher penalties for espionage, maybe even the creation of a dedicated foreign intelligence agency like an MI6 or a CIA.
And traditionally, the ghost of 1945 and the public's fear of a surveillance state stops that kind of legislation in its tracks.
It always has. But if you have a perfect victim, you can change the narrative. By presenting this story now, the helpful, innocent Japanese man who was just trying to give directions and got duped by the sneaky Russian, it completely reframes the debate.
So,
The government's message is no longer, we need more power to watch you. The message becomes, we need more power to protect you, the innocent citizen, from being used and exploited by foreign powers. It turns the spy paradise label from a quirky but abstract fact into a national embarrassment and a direct threat that needs to be fixed right away. This case provides the perfect ammunition to pass those controversial laws.
So as we wrap this up, what we are really watching is a nation at a pivot point. Japan is finally deciding to put serious locks on the doors.
They have to. They are being forced to move from being a spy paradise to becoming an economic security state. It's part of a global trend, really, this weaponization of supply chains and technology. It's necessary for their survival in this new, much more competitive and hostile geopolitical climate, but it absolutely marks the end of an era.
The naive, open, post-war Japan is closing up shop.
Right. The cost of that openness has just become too high.
We started this deep dive thinking about a simple, polite interaction on a Tokyo street corner, and we've ended up dissecting the collapse of a nation's post-war identity. It leaves you wondering. In a world where kindness is treated as a security flaw and a simple thank you is the opening move for an intelligence operation, the social fabric of a place like Japan is forced to change. When the government has to tell you to be suspicious of the lost traveler asking for directions, you might gain a measure of national security, but you certainly lose something else, something valuable, along the way.